All right, Dr. G, well, welcome to the Unfiltered Healing Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Can
Well,
you hear me?
yes, I can hear you. We're so honored to have you on today's podcast, and we're really excited to talk all about the microbiome and the mycobiome, which is a term that you actually coined, which is pretty extraordinary. Dr. G, you've done some amazing and extensive research on this topic in particular. How did you first get into this topic or into this field? Was this something that you had been interested in for a while, or maybe it was like a personal reason that got you into this? Let's just dig in a little bit about your inspiration for what you do now.
Great. I mean, really, how I started, I used to go to meetings, scientific meetings, and people are talking about the microbiome. And while sitting there, everybody talks about the microbiome, they really mean bacteria. And this took me back to when I did my PhD, my doctorate in England, very long time ago, my friend. It's like 1974 or, where I studied the effect of antibiotics and steroids on animals. And we found that it causes fungal infection. You see, like for example, when women use tetracyclines to kill bacteria, they tend to have thrush. They develop fungal infections. That's why I thought, oh, everybody talking about this. In fact, we really need to talk about not only bacteria but also fungus. Okay, and that's why I started writing opinion pieces. Say we really need to look into this. And it took some time, believe it or not, over a decade for people to figure out this is an important area, which made me happy. Recently, the National Institute of Health said, oh, we should study the microbiome beyond bacteria, which really, that's exactly what I was trying to do, you know? And of course, what excited me more because of the relationship between antibiotics and immunosuppression and the fungus, I started to study uh, patients with AIDS, HIV infected patients. And we looked at their oral cavity, and what we found that there is imbalance in their microbiome, not only in bacteria but also in candida fungus, because remember, these patients, they develop oral thrush. And that's really what excited me about this area. I said, you know what, I really need to go into this in more details. And then it's so interesting how life leads you to from the mouth to the gut. Some people were talking about Crohn's disease, and I know, of course, that the relationship between fungi and bacteria in the gut. So I said, let's look into that. And our first paper was looking at Crohn's disease patient and see what is the imbalance in their microbiome. And we found that there is a change in bacteria as well as a fungus, like E. coli, Serratia, two bacteria, pathogenic bacteria, and the fungus, really Candida tropicalis, one of the species of Candida. And really what excited me more about this, when we published that paper, a lot of people, including families with kids that have gut issues, start reaching out to me saying, oh, how can we understand more and this sort of thing. And really this excited me to say this is an area where I would love to continue working on and try hopefully to help people. And this is what happened really ever since.
Yes, and we're so lucky that you did because we have all of your brilliant research. Now, and also it's exciting because I would say the past decade too, now there's a lot of focus on the gut and gut health, which, we know is super important and key, but there's also other parts of the microbiome. So, many I would say most or many of my audience of my podcast, knows what the microbiome is, but for maybe some that are not as familiar, would you kind of briefly describe what the microbiome is kind of before we get into the importance of it and how it's, much more than the bacteria, like you said?
Certainly, certainly. The microbiome, if we go, the definition of it is what germs or microbes that live in and on our body. You have germs, as we know, in our hands. That's why when we wash our hands just before we eating or after going to the bathroom. Also, we have germs all over our skin. But really the greatest amount of microorganisms are present in our gut. So they live there. So if you look at the microbiome, it's the community, different communities of microbes that live in and on our body. This includes bacteria, fungi, viruses, of course, as well as we have something archaebacteria, which is single cell organisms, and parasites. So all of these are really communities that live together in our body and on our body, and we call them microbiome.
Yes. And we have lots of different microbiomes, correct? Like, it's not just in our gut, like you said, it's in our skin. What are some of the other areas that we have microbiome as well?
I mean, we have microbiome in our hair, for example. People with have dandruff, for example, they have different microbiome. You have it in our reproductive system, like women, for example, in the vaginal tract, you have microbiome. We have microbiome. Every surface in our body, even in our nose, you have different organisms, So the microbes that live in our body all over the skin, as well as in our mouth, in our gut, in our reproductive system, all of these are different communities of microbes that live there, and really they can be beneficial or they could be detrimental. In other words, they could cause issues for us. That's why it's good to understand them and try to see how we can keep them in balance, because having them in balance is going to help us a lot.
Right. And even with the different kinds and the different areas, they still all communicate with each other as well, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I think I always like to say, these microbes that live in our body, it's like kids playing in a sandbox. You have girls, you have boys, you have little kids, they're playing together in the sandbox, okay? And in the sandbox, they play together. That's exactly what happens in our gut or in our skin. So when we have kids in a sandbox that play nicely together, they keep everybody happy. Moms and dads are happy, everybody is happy. So they interact together, but they also, sometimes you have in sandbox a bully come and that's why it's very important to understand these organisms, they are together and they play together to and our detriment.
Right. Yeah, that's super important and super key, and we'll dig into that in a moment. Now, how does the microbiome set up? Because I heard you talk a little bit about, it starts even before our birth. So can you talk a little bit about how, that is kind of set up for us initially, and then the things that, make it flourish or don't make it flourish?
Yes, I mean, really, as you said, the microbes start just before our birth, like when a baby is still in his mom's body, and then they start to acquire these germs as they are born, as they go out from the vaginal canal, or if they have C-section, for example. The way of birth is really very important, and you could have different microbes depending on the way a baby is born. Okay, whether it's naturally or through C-section, for example. Also, as babies, what really helps formation of the microbiome is what type of food we eat. If the baby is breastfed or have his mom's milk, is different if you have formula, for example. So at the early months of life, this is what forms the microbiome, but then this continues up to a couple of years where it becomes stabilized, and then each one will have their own characteristic microbiome. And in adulthood, usually it's stable till you become a little bit older in age, like myself, you'll start to have different microbes as we age. So as we age, as you know, our gut lining changes, and because this gut lining changes and there are some immune really pro-inflammatory events happening, we'll start to have different microbiome. So again, so at early lifetime and as we get older, we have differences in the microbiome, and in general during adulthood it's stable.
Yeah, and would you say with children specifically having gut issues and microbiome issues so early on now, what would you attribute that to the most? Would you say it is because of like birth interventions or not really breastfeeding as much or a combination of all of those things?
I think it's a combination of all of this. Also, a combination of the diet. As the babies start to grow, and then they start eating food, solid food. Of course, diet plays a very important role in this. Also, as the children are growing, if they are exposed to too many antibiotics, for example, because they have ear infection and whatever, if they have antibiotics to treat infection, it really changes the microbiome. But sometimes people use antibiotics for example, they have viral infection or infection caused by viruses, which really antibiotics does not work against them. They go and use antibiotics, and we recently showed that using antibiotics, you are gonna kill not only, especially the broad spectrum antibiotics, in other words, the antibiotics that can kill anything in its way. These broad spectrum antibiotics, they kill the
Yeah.
beneficial bacteria and fungus, as well as they kill the organism that cause infection. So there are multiple factors that could affect the microbiome composition, including, as we said, the top of it is the
Yeah.
diet and different pharmaceutical products.
Yeah, I think it's tough too because, a lot of moms, especially if they're new moms and they go to their doctor's office in general, they're technically most of the time just given antibiotics, right? It doesn't really matter what it is. So I
Yes.
think that's tough too, educational wise, that, they don't really know anything or other methods to utilize.
Yes, absolutely. And now we are really trying to put in place educational, CME courses and educational papers. Like one of the things which I am working on now, it's called demystifying the microbiome, so that we can help healthcare providers to understand this. And also, it's very important. We are trying to spread the word about antibiotic stewardship. In other words, you use antibiotics when you need them, because look, if you have an infection, you need to kill that infection, but you don't have to use it when you don't have an infection. So we are trying to help people understand that it's good to have these antibiotics. It's fantastic, but we need to use them when we need them, not anytime we don't feel well. Oh, let's have these antibiotics. And also, we are educating not only, hopefully, the public, but most importantly, the healthcare providers.
Yeah, super important. Other than antibiotics, what are some other things that can influence our microbiome?
I mean, there are a lot of products. Like, for example, people take acid reflux drugs. This is not really very good, because acid reflux, look, if you have some acidity, okay to use it, but people just take it because it's OTC product, over the counter product. They just use it without really need. Sometimes they just take it because they think, oh, I may have some acid reflux, let me have some. So this is one thing. Also, there are some shampoos, some detergents which have a lot of antibiotics in them. Also, it's not necessary, because they say antibacterial and this sort of thing. We really should look at bacteria and fungus, in a new light. It is not all bad. Some of them are good, and therefore we need to try to preserve them. That's why we published a paper in March of this year where we compared narrow spectrum antibiotics versus broad spectrum antibiotic. What do you mean by that? Narrow spectrum is an antibiotic that target only a small type of bacteria, whereas the broad spectrum antibiotic kill everything in its way. And our study showed that using the narrow spectrum, we really are causing less damage to the beneficial organisms compared to the broad spectrum antibiotics. Okay?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's great. Is it that they didn't necessarily have access to those other types of antibiotics, or were they just taught, just use broad spectrum?
I mean, usually we had more broad spectrum antibiotics because when somebody comes to the doctor, sometimes they don't know what's the causing organism, so they give them this probiotic because it covers everything. Okay, but now I think with the awareness that it's important to have antibiotic stewardship, in other words, you need to watch to use it when you really need it against that particular organisms. There are some companies that are trying to develop narrow spectrum antibiotics, those that will go after a certain bacteria that can cause a specific infection. For example, acne. There are certain organisms, there are certain drugs that are narrow spectrum that will help rather than using something which is a broad spectrum. So now there is awareness in the community. It's getting better, let's put it this way. And hopefully in the coming few years, we are going to see more and more of these narrow spectrum antibiotics, so that we have the use of antibiotic targeted rather than let's have, really kill everything in our way.
Right. And I think you mentioned in your talk as well that antibiotics, you said acid reflux. Was it also steroids that also affect your microbiome, or some other type of medication you were mentioning?
Yes, steroids definitely, immunosuppressive agents as well. Steroids, like for example, corticosteroids, because what happens these, I mean, in fact, I did my doctorate showing that steroids affect the level of candida, the more, which is a pathogenic yeast, or pathogenic fungi that can cause disease. So giving people steroids all the time when they don't need it, it's going to encourage the growth of the pathogenic fungi. Okay, but the same with the immunosuppressive agents. When you lower the immunity of a person, also you are going to increase the imbalance as well. So there are a slew of antibiotics, drugs that can affect our microbiome. And as I told you, shampoo, for example, other hand sanitizer. It's good to use hand sanitizer, but look, let the kids go out and play in the soil outside, in the garden, because we get exposed to different microbes there, and guess what? Our body will start to develop immunity to them. When I had my kid when he was little. Now he's a big guy. Afif is 42 now. When he was a little kid, we tell him go and play outside. And our neighbor, he has his child, and he wanted him to play, but he put white gloves. And whenever, of course, the white gloves they come dirty, you see, this is dirty. Don't play there. And the poor kid was all the time sick because he is not getting exposed to these organisms. In fact, there are studies to show that kids who live in farms, they play with animals, with pets, they are better protected. They have more immunity to these than others. So you can see it's really a number of factors, including drugs, of course, different types of drugs.
Yeah, and that's why we put out information like this, is because, there's so much of a fear around microbes. And if people don't understand, yeah, there are some pathogenic ones we're aware of, and we're knowledgeable of, but you're also made of these things, as we're explaining. So we can't really fear the world, and we can't fear, microbes, as we have to be in harmony with them. So we have, you went through medications. that affect your microbiome. Obviously, food can affect your microbiome. What are some other, are there any other lifestyle issues that can also
Yes,
affect how your microbiome function?
this is very, very important aspect as well. For example, exercise. Exercise is very, very important. And always I say, look, you don't have to do intensive exercise or kill yourself. Even if you do 30 minutes walk, 3 times a week is very important. It has been shown that people who exercise, they have better microbiome than not. Also sleep. Sleep is very important. The other thing which is really affect your microbiome is stress. And these days we are living in a world which is really very stressful, not only at work, but also with the COVID, with all the situation we are having. This make people stressed out. And therefore, it's very important that we try to lessen this stress. So you can see lifestyle plays an important role in our microbiome balance. And of course, if we have the microbiome out of balance, guess what? You are going to have different types of diseases, different types of gut issues, as well as you have issues with your gut brain axis. And of course, depression is one of them, stress as well. So all of these we need to try to optimize. And a lot of the time I tell people, listen, please, in addition to exercising, try to have few minutes a day, just relax, don't do anything, try to do a bit of yoga or do breathing. It's really very, very important. I always laugh because I never did yoga, but recently, in the last actually 3-4 years, I start to do yoga, and it's a great relaxing exercise. You enjoy yourself, you are focusing on stretching out and whatever, you don't think about anything else. So this is very important. We should include it in our daily activities to relax a little bit, and also, try to sleep better, because this is very, very important. And please exercise.
Right. Yeah, we're all about movement. We love moving our bodies. We're meant to move. What, I wonder, what specifically, if you recall, about exercise that affects the microbiome so much? Is it, the blood flow or lymphatic flow? Is there something particularly through exercise that affects the microbiome?
I mean, clearly with the exercise, what you are doing, you are first of all, you hopefully you are losing a little bit of weight, which is important. Also, you with exercise, you are trying to watch also what you are eating, because you are trying to build some muscles and whatever. But also, what you said, the blood flow, you have better breathing abilities. You are creating a healthy body, and with that, it will be very, very important. So definitely with exercise you are lowering your blood pressure. And remember, even when you exercise, you are reducing the stress. And by doing this, because you are not thinking about anything else, you are going to have a better microbiome because of the gut brain axis. So it's multiple of factors
Yeah.
that come
Yeah,
together.
we'll get to the gut brain. Okay. Yeah, we'll get to the gut brain axis in just a moment. What exactly does all the microbiome support? So, when all of these layers of our good guys are supporting one another, overall, what does that support in our body, in different functions of our body?
Number one, they help our gut lining. The gut lining, as you know, our stomach and our intestine in particular, there is a epithelial cells. There is a layer which is really allows things to go be absorbed, others not get absorbed. Okay, so if you have a good microbiome, it help in forming a healthy gut lining. Okay, and by doing that, you are preventing the what we call the existence of leaky gut. Because if your gut lining is not intact, is not healthy, then you start to break down the barrier, and toxins start to go through into our bloodstream. Okay, so that's number one. It helps our gut lining. Number two, they produce some metabolites or small molecules, small compounds called short chain fatty acid, for example, which are important for our immune function. It improves our immunity. And of course, the better immune system you have, the more you are able to fight infections. Okay, it also can communicate with our brain so that we'll start secreting happy molecules like different endorphins, for example. Serotonin is mostly produced in the gut, and serotonin is what makes us happy. So all of this work together to try to uh, protect our health and give us a better healthy situation. Also, we recently published we are really actually submitting a paper now to show that these microbes, when they are in your body, they help you with different digestive issues, like for example bloating, abdominal pain, flatulence, as well as constipation. When you have a balanced microbiome, all of these will improve and you become healthier.
I remember you mentioning as well they could also affect stem cell population.
Yes, they affect our stem cell, and about stem cells. They can evolve into different cell types, which are very healthy. And there is a lot of research these days to try to use stem cells for different treatments. So encouraging those organisms, it will help the turnover, and most probably it may affect cancer as well. In other ways, they reduce
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. So what are some right, right. So what are some health implications if our microbiome is imbalanced, like we've been talking about mostly thus far? And, specifically when we talk about dysbiosis, we can talk about that a little bit. Um, because you also talked and focused quite a bit on the biofilm, which is, we talk about not just bacteria, it's a myriad of different things. So can you go into a little bit about some health implications of when this
Yeah.
gets dysfunctional?
I mean, that's really what's so interesting about it. We spent at the beginning time to try to understand the microbiome, what is there. And now we are starting, now, I mean, we already have identified that if you have an imbalance or what you call dysbiosis in the microbiome, in other words, they are not microbes in our gut or in our skin, but let's focus on our gut. If they are playing together nicely, we say they are in harmony, they help us. But if they are out of balance, they are fighting together, that's where the implication becomes. And there are a number of diseases where it shows the microbiome imbalance is involved. This goes from skin issues, atopic dermatitis, psoriasis, for example. It goes into the oral cavity, and I gave an example, in HIV infected patients or AIDS patients, they have this dysbiosis, and we have more thrush. We published a paper on tongue cancer. We looked at the tongue cancer patients, and we found that there is imbalance in both bacteria and fungi as well there. So that's in the oral cavity. If you go into the gut, obviously gastrointestinal issues, Crohn's disease, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, apart IBD also, in general, is affected. If you go into the neurodegenerative diseases such as autism, for example, or Alzheimer, also is affected. So you can see all different parts of our bodies. If the balance of the microbiome is affected, you are going to end up with having negative health issues. Okay, that's why it's very important for us to maintain the microbiome balance as much as we can, because that's what will keep us healthy, not only in our gut but all over our body.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that if there's any type of health complaint or issue, the microbiome could probably be playing a role there. just because it's so systemic, as you're talking about.
Exactly. And well, recently, oh, of course, we didn't mention cancer. There is a lot of types of cancers that are associated with imbalance of the microbiome, like colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancer. They all have been shown that there is microbiome element. We recently published also some gastric cancers. Also, we showed that there is imbalance in the microbiome, as well as we just had a paper accepted in adenoma, for example. We saw imbalance in the microbiome. So you can see, honestly, that every day we see some new discovery how the microbiome affects our body.
Right. Yeah, just so much systemic implications of it. Now, I'm going to go back because you talked about how it also influences things of the memory and of the brain or neurodegenerative or neurological issues. So let's go into the topic of the gut brain axis a little bit and where you have seen, either through your research or through your experience, the implications of how the gut affects the brain, how that process works, and then what are some results if that gets disrupted.
Sure. I mean, first of all, let's define what is the gut-brain axis. For a long time, we thought everything comes from the brain to tell our body what to do. Now we're starting to see that there is bidirectional communication. In other words, we have messages coming from our brain and messages come from our gut. It's both ways. It's not just one way from the brain to our gut. No, we have messages from the gut to the brain and the brain to our gut, and they communicate together. And remember, I told you they produce, for example, serotonin, they produce short chain fatty acids. All of these could affect the immune system and of course could affect the brain. One of the things we showed, really, we did a clinical trial, we showed that in autistic kids there is imbalance in the microbiome in the gut, and we showed that there is a relationship with the digestive issues that these kids have is really related to the imbalance in the microbiome. Okay, so this brain and other people are looking at Alzheimer, for example. Different neurodegenerative diseases have been associated between the gut and the brain. So it's two-way system. If you have imbalance in the gut, it will affect your brain. And if you are stressed, remember, stressed or depressed, you are going to affect your gut. So that's why these are really interconnected in a way.
Yeah, because for many years before, this research came out, I don't think people knew or to associate, their digestive issues or the health of their gut was actually affecting their mood and how they felt. And it's not just all, mental wellness or mental illness issues. It's also really internally how biochemically things are being made and being broken down. So I think that's very impactful now for people to learn. It's not just all mentally in your head. There's some biochemical things that affect this as well.
Oh, absolutely. That's why a lot of the time now, the new wave of studies is going to be in what we call metabolites. Metabolites, which is really what are the small compounds or molecules that are produced in our body and how they can affect. Because remember, when the microbes in our gut, they don't go there into the bloodstream and go to the brain and affect it. Of course, except if there is like infection or something like this. These organisms that are living in our gut, when they are happy, the beneficial one, they produce these molecules which could affect our brain. However, if you have organisms which are in dysbiosis, out of balance, where there is a lot of pathogen, then they produce also chemicals that could affect our brain negatively. That's why all of these are really related.
Yeah, one of those is candida, right? Like when it gets overproducing, doesn't it secrete the acetaldehydes, and then it can, also make your brain feel fuzzy or things of that nature as well?
Yes, definitely. I did many years ago. I studied the alcohol dehydrogenase and how it connects with acetaldehyde by candida. And also what we found that this alcohol dehydrogenase also can affect the ability of candida to produce the biofilms, which you briefly mentioned. And having this biofilm really is detrimental to us, because once these yeast form in the gut lining. Remember, the gut lining, we need it to be intact. It's like the pipe in our houses, in our bathroom. We need the pipes, water pipes, to be don't leak, because if they leak, then we are going to have a flood. Now the same happens in our gut. If we have candida, they form biofilms. It's like the plaque in our teeth. They stick there and they start poking holes in our gut, and by doing this they'll start to cause all these negative effect. So it's very fascinating way how these microbes can work and affect us, not only in our gut but also beyond.
Maybe you can define what biofilm actually is, because someone may not understand, exactly what you're talking about.
Sure. Biofilm, I mean, the easiest way to think about it is the plaque in our teeth. Every morning and evening, what we do, we brush our teeth. Why do we do that? Because we want to get rid of the plaque. And the plaque is a biofilm. Now, what is a biofilm? Biofilm, these organisms, both bacteria and fungi, sometimes alone and sometimes together, they come and stick or adhere to the surface. As we say, let's say the best example is in our teeth. They stick to the surface and they start to produce what we call matrix. Matrix is like a jello. It's a jello, and inside this jello we have, let's say, raisins or M&Ms, okay? And these M&Ms or raisins are the microbes, and they are covered with jello, and by being covered in the jello it really protects them, okay? Basically, what is this jello chemically? It's like carbohydrates, it's sugar, okay? Sugar, sometimes you have some proteins a little bit which are secreted. It's like become, you are in a jello, and inside this jello we have these germs which are protected, because to go into them and kill these germs or get rid of them, you have to get rid of the jello. You know what I mean? So this is the biofilm, and this biofilm not only happens in the mouth, also we showed it happens in the gut, in our gut. And they form these organisms. They come, the first step is to stick to the gut lining, okay, and then they start to produce these molecules like jello which cover them, and of course it allows them to be protected not only against antibiotics, for example, or antifungal, but also against our immune system. We published a paper a long time ago where we showed that, the phagocytic cells, the cells that can come and engulf the bacteria and the germs, they can't do it when you have a biofilm. Okay, so in a way they have a protected environment, as if they are living inside a tent and nothing can go through that tent. Okay, and that's what happened in the gut as well as in our teeth.
And this natural process that these microbes secrete this biofilm, is there something in general that encourages it to grow more or encourages it, to be a bigger problem? Or is it kind of the things we've already mentioned that influence that?
I mean, definitely the things we talked about influence it, but in general, biofilms, I mean, they grow basically organisms to protect themselves. They stick into surfaces, and one of them they stick into, as I told you, the best simplest example, they stick to our teeth, okay, and they start to produce the plaque, and it protects them, okay. So if you provide them the actual suitable environments, suitable components that they are growing and they overgrow, that's where really they benefit a lot, because then you cannot get rid of them.
Right. Yeah. And would you say the oral microbiome I mean, it's influenced with the gut microbiome and vice versa as well, correct? Like people that
Yeah.
get a lot of, say dental cavities or things of that nature, that's the
Oh,
microbiome at play.
oh, definitely, definitely. And there are studies to show that there is concordance, like agreement, between sometimes what's present in the mouth and what's present in the gut. After all, they are all connected, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to getting out, the bad guys, which we have to weed out some of those bad guys when that happens, what are some things that you would suggest, other that we've mentioned to encourage some of the good guys to also flourish, whether it's diet related. I know that so many people take probiotics. I mean, are they really that effective for this? Could you kind of, explain that a little bit further?
I think, as we said, diet is very important, and that's why we say it's very important to have fibers. Eat fibers. In unripened bananas, in beans. All of these. Why? Because these fibers, what really our body cannot break them down, but the microbes in our body, the beneficial one, are able to break them. And once they break them, they start to grow and provide a very friendly environment. Okay, so that's one thing. Of course, probiotics are also have been shown to be beneficial, because they will support the beneficial organisms in our body, in our gut, and we need that because we need them to support them so that they can produce all these good metabolites or these good molecules that can help us with our immune system, protect the gut lining, and so on and so forth, like we mentioned.
Are you a fan more of, like a supplement form of a probiotic? Or, I try to encourage my patients to eat more probiotic rich foods to get a wider spectrum. What do you kind of recommend for your patients? Or is it really, specific on the testing that comes up?
Really, I think in general it's very good to eat good food that will support the microbiome, and we mentioned like fibers, proteins from plants. Let's avoid meats with a lot of fat and this sort of thing. Fish is very good, like I love fish, salmon, and this sort of thing because of the omega 3 oil, so this is one point you need to do. Like if you eat healthy, it's gonna help your beneficial organism. However, sometimes I think taking a probiotic will also help support these organisms, okay, and the beneficial one. So to me, it depends. If you eating a lot of the stuff that is good and you have a balanced microbiome, you need little probiotic to take. But if you feel you are out of sort, you have certain symptoms, digestive symptoms, then it will be good to have probiotic to help your microbiome and support the beneficial ones. I don't think it's wise just to use a
Do you
probiotic.
recommend?
Sorry, I'm just saying, like it's not wise. They say, look, I'll take probiotic and then I go and eat everything which is unhealthy, the Western diet, for example. It is a combination. Moderation in this is very, very important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, especially if people do take antibiotics, they're like, oh, I just take a probiotic. And it's like, well, you got to do some other things with that as
Yes,
well.
yes.
If if someone's, microbiome is really unhealthy, do you recommend then that, those individuals kind of switch probiotics that they're taking, different species? Are there ones, that you would typically recommend that you see the most often that are depleted?
I think what I recommend, and this is part of for the sake of transparency, I started a company called BiohmHealth, and we develop probiotics, but also and other super greens and whatever. But we also do gut testing. There is at-home gut test because we are all individualized people, and sometimes the balance is not is different for different people. So you can take at-home gut test, and that will look into your microbiome, compare it to control people who are healthy, and then based on that they can recommend to you, the nutritionist can recommend to you what type of food to eat, what type of probiotic to take, or for example, do you need certain vitamins, vitamin D3, vitamin B, C, whatever, okay? And that is guided by the testing of your gut. If you can do that test, will help you.
You segued perfectly into the next question I was going to ask you, which was about your gut testing and your company. So talk a little bit about, what makes your company different, because there's so much gut testing now on the
Sure.
market. Is it a stool test that you're testing, the microbiome through the stool, or how would you talk about your testing specifically?
I mean, basically, our testing, yes, you send a stool sample, you know, and when it comes to the lab, we look at two things. We don't look only at bacteria, we look at bacteria and fungus, because as we mentioned, in the earlier, this bacteria and fungi, they work together and they can cooperate to our health, benefit our health. So the gut testing will look at what is the profile of your microbiome, both bacteria and fungi, and then compare this to control samples. In other words, we have thousands of people who submitted these samples, and we created data to show what is the microbiome of healthy people. So we remove people who are on antibiotics, people who are have some certain disease or condition, and we made a profile what a healthy people should look like. And then when you send your sample, we compare your sample to those healthy people. Sometimes you see it is very close to the healthy. Some we say, look, it's good, continue what you are doing. Maybe if you want to supplement yourself with a little probiotic, that's fine. But if you are out of balance, depending on the type of imbalance, both in bacteria and fungi, you may need to have different types of diet as well as different type of probiotic and vitamins. Okay, and that's what we do. We have a team of nutritionists that can send a report with recommendations about diet, exercise. We look if somebody has stress, also what they should do. So you have to remember at all the factors that could affect your microbiome. Not only the diet, but if you exercise, if you are stressed. Sometimes we have people who are really so stressed out, and you look at what they eat very good food, very healthy food, yet their microbiome is out of balance. And then we looked at their stress, and it is so really severe, highly stressed, they say. Then we try to advise them to do some yoga, some meditation, as we mentioned about. So it's really more personalized recommendation rather than having something general.
Right. Even being in the sun, right?
Oh,
People that
definitely.
hide away in their home all day, that affects it too.
Yes, sure, sure.
So is the testing more than, like you said, looking at all of the factors, but how the beneficial ones in colonies, does your testing also look at possible pathogenic ones or
Sure.
toxins or things of that nature that are also affecting, or is that a different type of test?
No, it's the same test. It doesn't look at toxins, okay, but it looks at the pathogenic organism or bacteria and fungus that can cause disease. What we did, you need to remember, when you do a microbiome test, it gives you a full profile of what organism, and sometimes that live in your body, in your gut. It could be up to 200 different bacteria or different, but some of it are transient. They come from food, we eat cheese, for example, we have penicillium there. So not all of them are very, very important. So what we do, we zoom into what are the most important beneficial organisms and what are the most important pathogenic organisms, and that will then we look at it and we say that, okay, this person has a low level of beneficial organisms such as lactobacillus or bifidobacterium, okay, while or fecalobacterium. So we encourage them to have ways diet as well as probiotic to increase those beneficial. At the same time, we look if you have an increase in the bad ones, and then with that we recommend that what you need to do. I give you an example. Like if you have an increase in protobacteria, one type, a phylum of bacteria, which is really associated with inflammation. Okay, so then we can tell you, guess what? You really need to take vitamin D3. You need to take fiber, because these have been shown to really decrease the level of protobacteria. Okay, so that's why. But if you give everybody the 200 organisms, they are going to confuse them more than help them. So that's why we spent a lot of time trying to identify what are the organisms that can impact your gut health and overall health, both in beneficial as well as the harmful one. And based on this, we come out with the recommendation. However, if some people want to know more about their microbiome, they can ask, do I have, for example, a specific organism? We can go back into the data and look at it. But we don't give it to start with, because it's going to be really very, very confusing to people. Only focus on what is relevant. That's the key.
Right. And I think that's such a key component of what you just stated, is that if we're trying to work on maybe one specific thing, that's the validity of this type of testing, and you just go out and buy all these probiotics, it could confuse them rather than actually help you. So that's, such a key foundational point that you stated when you're looking into this stuff. Testing does help quite a bit for us to figure out, what your levels are, and then not just to go out and buy anything on the market, but really customize,
Exactly.
Each of our own unique microbiome.
Absolutely.
And do you also have, you talked about, you also have, what is it called? You have like a preliminary test as well that people can do before doing your biome test
Yes.
that you do,
Yes.
and it just tells them, right, if they could possibly have it.
That's really very, very good point. We started a quiz called Gut Test. You find it at guttesting.com. And what it does, it asks you questions, and based on these questions, it can give you an indication that you may have imbalance. Okay, it helps you. And then if you want to know more specifically about your gut, then you go do the gut testing, because then you have fecal samples and whatever. However, we looked all through our data and we designed this quiz, guttesting.com, which really is going to help you to tell you, if you have, let's say, 3 or more different things you do, then you are likely to have an imbalance. So this test could help a lot.
Yeah, and I think it helps a lot too to know those factors, because I think when people specifically look into the gut and they're finding, say, like a candida overgrowth or candida overbalance, typically the structure is to just take antifungals and to, take, anti-candida things. And that's why it's so important, all of these things that you're mentioning, is it's really a balance of so many different levels of your microbiome. It's a balance of even the bacteria and the fungal together. And it's not always just about, killing everything. It's really feeding and weeding, where you need to.
Yeah, I love what you say, feeding and weeding. This is absolutely the right way to do. We need to feed the good ones and get rid of the bad ones.
Absolutely. So what are some current or new research products that research projects, you're looking into right now?
This is really very important question. As I mentioned, we have been doing gut testing for thousands of people, and part of the testing we ask questions about health conditions. So now what we did, we identified cohorts with people who have different conditions. Like, for example, just to answer your question, we are looking at people with stress, what sort of imbalance they have, and based on the imbalance, we are now starting to design nutritional supplement that will rebalance this imbalance, like that will bring back, restore the gut microbiome balance, and also maintain it. So that's when we are interested in stress. We are interested in autism, for example. As I mentioned, we really are doing some neat stuff, but this usually take a bit of time to come out with anything in that regard. We are really now focusing on how can we use the microbiome data to design novel products that can address certain issues, okay, conditions. So this is really the exciting area where really it makes me happy. And then people ask me, are you going to retire? I say no, because I really like what we are doing, and I think this, I hope we will be able to develop products that will help people not only in their gut health but overall health.
Yes, this topic is so fascinating, and I'm sure we could talk many hours on all of the intricacies of it. But we just want to thank you so much for your time. We truly appreciate, we know you're super busy and all of the things that you do. And also just what you're doing in this field. We so appreciate you and we honor that and what you're continuing to do. So where can people kind of plug your biome and some other things? Where can people continue to follow some of your research and some of your work?
I am now, actually now BiohmHealth.com are starting to add a lot of this information so that we can help people. For example, we also starting to talk about how we can use our data to develop these products, and now they are listing the publications which we are writing. It's like in academia, it's publish or perish. So I publish a lot these days to try to educate people, and all of these are listed in BiohmHealth.com or in the process of being done. But also, if you put my name and you put microbiome or Mycology in Google, even you are gonna find a lot of papers which are just published, in this area. And I'm very active in this. I love it.
Amazing.
I love it with my group of researchers. I always say you don't need drugs to make somebody happy or excited. We academicians and scientists are happy when we find good ways to move the science forward and help people.
Yes, knowledge is power. The more you know, the more you
It
can
really,
help, the more you can heal.
it really is. It really is.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. And thank you for everyone tuning in today. We will catch all of you guys on the next episode.
Thank you for having me. It really was a great pleasure. Okay.